turned it around. So, but it seems to be okay now. So what we were doing is we were still looking at Esther and doing a deep dive into Esther. And so I'm going to continue. And where we left off was Esther had been chosen queen, and the king was, was very kind to her and whatever. And now we're going back to Mordecai. It's like this is like a story, and now we're Esther, Mordecai, back and forth. And so I'm going to wait. How do I do the share screen? And Book of Esther and share. I have a huge monitor now. So it's, hold on, who just tried to get in? Okay. So it should look pretty big, and I can see more people, I think. Yeah, this is interesting. No, not really. It's too, okay. So let's see. Whoops. So we were back to in those days when Mordecai sat at the king's gate, which I think is interesting because we don't really know what his what he does for a living, how he lives, how he earns or anything, but he's always sitting outside the gate, all the time hanging out. Unless suddenly it strikes me, maybe outside the gate was a big market, like a shuk, and maybe he was sitting out there and he placed I don't know. It's totally my imagination because I don't understand how you spend all day long sitting outside the gates and survive. But this is a story, so, they don't think about those details. All right, so Cindy, why don't you start?
In those days, while Mordecai sat at the king's gate, Bigtan and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains from the threshold's guards, became angry and planned to assassinate King Ahasuerus. The matter became known to Mordecai, and he informed Queen Esther. Esther then informed the king of it in Mordecai's name.
I don't remember that. Honestly, I mean, it's so interesting when you read it, like you look at the text. Did any of you realize that he told Esther and that Esther reported it? I didn't realize that. I thought he informed authorities. I didn't realize that Esther is already involved. So that's interesting. I mean, it makes Esther more of an active person in the story than I remember, honestly. And so he informed Queen Esther, which means he had a conduit to her. He had come some kind of way to send her messages. And then she told the king. Okay, so here's a question we're going to look at later. The king reads the book, remember, and he says he didn't know about it. Remember that later on? So we're going to look at that. So that's kind of like not consistent. Okay, continue.
The matter was investigated and found to be true, and the two were hanged on the gallows. It was then recorded in the book of Chronicles before the king.
Okay, so in front of the king, it was written down and he was informed. Let's remember all of this later when the king, says, oh, did we ever reward this guy? Oh, I didn't know this happened or whatever. So I think that's pretty interesting. Okay, so now we've set the scene. The Jews are, Esther's the queen, and now we hear about Haman. So, okay, Merle, do you want to read? But unmute yourself.
That's what I was trying to do.
Okay.
After these events, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, son of Hamdata, the Agagite, and advanced him. He placed a seat a few above all of his fellow ministers. As the king's servants at the king's gate,
all the king's
servants at the king's gate kneeled and bowed before Haman, for so had the king commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel or bow. The king's servants at the king's gate said to Mordecai, why do you transgress the king's command? And when they said this to him day after day, and he did not listen to them. They informed Haman to see if Mordecai's words would endure, for he had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel or bow before him, Haman was filled with wrath. Can you move it up? But thank you. But he thought it compatible to kill only Mordecai. Contemptible, I'm sorry, to kill only Mordecai, for they had informed him of Mordecai's nationality. Haman sought to annihilate all the Jews, Mordecai's people, throughout Ahasuerus's entire kingdom.
Okay, so let's talk about this for a minute. Where do I stop share? I mean, so let's just look at this. Was he the only Jew that did not bow down? Is that what we're getting? All the other Jews bow down? I mean, is he so unique, or is he symbolic? I mean, when you look at it, and that didn't Haman notice himself before the servants noticed? I mean, the story is, I don't know. And then what kind of character is Haman? I mean, that he's so, actually they say he's descended from the Amalekites, who were the mortal enemies of the Jews. And tradition says he was an ancestor of Hitler. There's just this idea of the ancestor of Hitler. So if we're looking at this as an allegory, what's sort of the story or the situation that this part of the Megillah is sort of telling us? If we see it as a story, but it has a message about the situation, what would it be, do you think? Penina.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I think number one is that assimilation did not protect us.
Right.
So that's number one. Number two is thank God that there is always a voice of somebody that's going to be aware or sensitive enough to see and to warn the people that it's happening. And
it
now,
is, yeah, go ahead.
and I think, and the fact that when I told you last time that I thought Esther was gutsy, that's exactly to that point that I was coming. I was a little bit like before talking about something that's before it really happened when we were discussing it.
Right.
So I think this is the point where, like I said, this is number one. And number two, somebody had the guts to speak up. And somebody had the guts to make a change and a difference. And
yeah, also, if we compare it to, I mean, so many times, Spain, where the Jews were, comfortable, and suddenly things turned on a dime. You know what I mean? The Spanish Inquisition came in, and suddenly people who had lived there, people went to Spain. Some Jews went to Spain actually after the destruction of the Second Temple, not the first, but the Second Temple. Okay. So that's like 70 CE until 1400s. They thought, we're part of the society. Same in Germany, and I'm looking at today, it's suddenly like things turned on a dime, like from 6 months ago. Anti-Semitism has been growing, really, honestly, since Trump, and we just had a film, none of you were there, about the Charlottesville March, and these 3 Jewish lawyers who sued 25 of the neo-Nazis, but it was about the court case, but they showed clips of these people and what they were saying about Jews on their radio shows, in public, in rallies, and it was terrifying. And suddenly there's this demonization, like Haman demonizes the Jews. And what's more shocking is how Ahasuerus goes along with it. He doesn't.
He was drunk most of the time, so he didn't care really.
Oh, he was drunk. Yeah, perhaps. We could say he was a weak leader and he was influenced. I think of, I don't know, I don't want to get too political, but how Dick Cheney had such an important, influence on George Bush, the second George Bush, W. He really had a lot of influence in terms of the invasion of Iraq and all that. He was a hawk and whatever. Like sometimes your advisors have more influence or undue influence. And here is this guy, and you're right, it's like we're not in assimilation or comfort. And that's so disturbing after, such a long time, that it still doesn't feel, the Purim story sort of saying, you always have to take care of each other and watch
And-
out and speak up and be there for each other. Yes.
And another point, please, if I may add, is also that everybody that when they did it benefited financially.
That's right.
They were all, the first thing that they did is they took jobs, then they took everything they belonged to, even physically belonged to, and used it in order to profit. And it's all to being blamed for things that never happened or never were even feasible. And people took it because they saw that they were advanced financially.
It's
to
right.
give you one more example, and that's it. During the Inquisition, Queen Isabella and Ferdinand expelled the Jews with all their clothes on their backs. And the next day, Columbus sailed the ships. The next day. And she said that she sold all their jewelry, but that wasn't true. And she had the person who was in charge of all the finances there was actually a Jew. Okay, when he fled, he didn't fled actually. When they were murdered, he was still in his position, and his life was threatened by the new queen of Spain and the new queen. Then he fled, and he was Jewish. He fled to Italy, and he became a Talmudic scholar, and he did a lot of things. And I'm talking about Abarbanel. That was his life.
Wow.
Because
Well, I
he
know
was the
that.
treasurer, and he had to flee. And when the new king and queen, because
Yes,
apparently they thought that he would know wherever the money was, or I don't know what.
I do
But this
know
is
that.
what was going on.
Well, yeah, I do know that the Jews of Spain had to leave all of their wealth behind.
The next day,
The next day,
Columbus
the Jews of Europe, all of their wealth was confiscated, their businesses, everything, even their
their
homes,
teeth, their hair,
everything. But I
everything.
mean, yeah,
Yes.
that was so. And I guess now this is, and here the Purim story is sort of reflecting that. So it makes you wonder what kind of culture or society the Jews of Persia were living in when this story was written. I don't know, but I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's continue. Helen, do you want to read? Okay, so let me go. We're in 7 here, but you're muted. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus's reign, a pur, which is a lot, was cast before Haman for every day and every month, and it fell on the 12th month, which is the month of Adar.
I want to also add that, Persians, their religion was Zoroastrianism and some paganism, and they were into astrology, and casting lots and all that stuff. So that was part of their culture. Continue.
Haman said to King Ahasuerus, quote, "There is one nation scattered and dispersed among the nations throughout the provinces of your kingdom, whose laws are unlike those of any other nation, and who do not obey the laws of the king. It is not in the king's interest to tolerate them. If it please the king, let an edict be issued for their destruction, and I will pay 10,000 silver talents to the functionaries to be deposited in the king's treasuries."
So Haman was actually bribing or giving the king money to do this. But does this little description of the Jews remind you of anything else?
Yeah.
Like what?
Nazism.
I was thinking also of Pharaoh, and Pesach, where they say, they're not like us and they could overpower us and they're too strong and blah, blah, blah. There's always this otherness that, okay, I want to ask you guys a question, you ladies. Wait, hold on. So this is interesting, and I don't have an answer. Let's just talk about it for a minute. There have been pressures on Jews since the beginning, since, the Exodus from Egypt, with all the fighting, and then we had the Babylonians, we had the Persians, we had the great Romans, we had the Greeks, and then we were, and the Assyrians also, and we were then dispersed. And it was always because you're too different, you don't follow, you're not like us. Why did we not ever assimilate? Why did we not ever say, I give up, I don't care, it's not worth it, or all right, I'll assimilate? Why do you think Jews still exist? Why do you think that? And I don't have I'm not going to give you an answer, because it's something I may have some opinions, but I'm just curious what you think.
But a lot did, and they turned to Christianity because Paul said, you don't have to follow all these rules. All you have to do is believe that Jesus is a savior. And a lot of people became Christians because it was easier.
So originally Christians were Jews, it was like the Messianic, but the majority of people who converted to Christianity were pagans. They were the Romans, they were the pagans, because as opposed to these punishing pagan gods, these not the word whimsical, but just kind of unpredictable, there was this loving, forgiving deity that Christianity preached. So it was very appealing to many, many pagans. Some Jews converted, but most didn't. But yeah, you're right, some did change, but we're still here. It seems kind of miraculous that we're still here, that we haven't, no matter, why even hang in there? It's a question. Susan.
So I would agree with Cindy, and I was going to say there are a lot more than just the earlier ones. It's all over the place. German Jews did, we American Jews did. You name it.
Converted, you're saying?
Yeah, didn't stay Jewish, I don't know that assimilated, let's put it that way. The assimilation, even in Israel, the Hellenistic Jews were, I don't know how they did it, but they said that men uncircumcised themselves. So I think that a more not plausible would be assimilation, not necessarily conversion. There were conversions as well in Spain.
But we're still here.
Yes, well, we're still here, but I think a remnant, when they talk about a remnant of those who believe, isn't that Shirith, Israel, those who came to the United States and founded a congregation? They were a remnant. And I don't know that it's a remnant now, but those who have deep faith, and I would say the Orthodox as one, are still around, but they are a minority, and we've always, maybe part of it is being a minority.
I don't know how many Jews there were at any one time. I don't ever think we were as a huge population, even in the land of Judea. How many Jews would there have been? How many Israelites? There were like 600. That's, the story is there were 600,000 who left Egypt. So it's not like we were ever more, we tend to sort of hover around 15 to 18 million in the world. If the Holocaust hadn't happened, we would probably have double that amount. But, okay, Merle.
What about our belief system? And what about those who believe in God? And what about those who accept, who like the Torah, the 10 Commandments and the mitzvot?
Well, I know, but we look at Egypt, the ancient Egyptian civilization, the Babylonian civilization, the Greek civilization, the Roman Empire, and they were huge, and lasted. The ancient Egyptian civilization lasted 1,000 or 1,500 years. It's just so much oppression of this little people. It's kind of amazing that we're not gone. Okay, I'm going to call on you, Panina, but I want to hear from other people. So Merle.
Okay,
I think
Merle first. Merle.
Okay, sure.
I I think a big piece of it is persistence of our people, that we want to keep it going. But I think, when I read that the numbers are getting lower, I think a lot of that is because we have people who, for whatever reason, leave synagogues after confirmation or after bar bat mitzvahs or whatever.
Yeah.
Yet those people, the people that we know, they're still Jewish. They still acknowledge their Judaism. They just choose not to belong. But I think a lot of this it's that I mean, we're never going to not belong to a temple. We happen to belong to three, which is, but we're not, but I think that, when we look around and we see people leave, we ask them why. Only in a few cases of mixed marriages.
But I'm talking about historically. I'm not talking about
all
today.
right, I
I'm
got it.
talking about historically. Helen.
I was just going to say, we're the chosen people. I question what we're chosen for, but that's been our label.
And do you think that's true?
The older I get, I think so, but it's a darker truism, it seems.
Well, it doesn't say what we're chosen for.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? I mean, I'm going to call on you in a minute, Penina. There's this really interesting book by Isaac Bashevis Singer, who was raised, I don't know if you know. His father was a Hasidic Rabbi. He had his own court in Poland. He was raised very Orthodox, and then he became secular, very Jewish, but much more secular. And he writes this unbelievable, it's a book called The Family Muscat. And it's about this guy who's raised with a similar Hasidic father, blah, blah, blah. And he goes out into the world and he experiences every type of secular life. He has mistresses, he's rich, he's in business, he assimilates, he does everything. He's even in the army, he does everything in the world. And at the end of the book, he has a son. I don't even know if he has a wife, but she's terrible. But anyway, he has a son. And he takes the son back to his father, to the Hasidic village to be raised. Because he says, of everything I've experienced, this is still the best. The values, the purity, or whatever. I think Isaac Bashevis Singer said, I don't believe in any religion, but the best one is still Judaism. Maybe there's something in that it's just the most meaningful for us, or there's nothing to leave it for that has any, I mean, yeah, many Jews have converted, but honestly, this is completely my opinion. I don't think a lot of them converted because they believed in what they converted to. I think they converted to save their lives or to get into business or to be accepted in society.
Yes.
Or to, get on with it. But or even to pretend. I don't think a lot of them said, wow, I really, really love Christianity. I'm leaving it. Some did. There are some. But I don't think most of them did that. I think it was for other reasons. So
look how big your conversion to Judaism class is.
It's pretty amazing how many people are coming to become Jewish. And their reasons are, it feels very humane and kind to them. I mean, they don't know enough yet. They just know that it feels accepting, kind, the values of family and, making your life have meaning and tikkun olam and all that. It just appeals to them as opposed to you're a sinner and you're going to hell or you're this or you're that. Penina.
But it's very comforting with Jesus. Don't worry, just believe and he'll take care of you.
But apparently that's Jesus, who was a Jew, by the way, said, but the churches have built all of this sin and hell, and if you don't believe, you're going to hell and all this stuff and you can't, they vilified sex and the body and so many things that are not in early Christianity, which honestly, I feel like most of early Christianity is like Reform Judaism. I feel like Jesus was saying all the rituals mean nothing if you're not loving your neighbor, if you're not helping if you're not following those ethical values. That's what he really wasn't interested in, which was really shocking in his time. to say that, to say, you know, sacrifices mean nothing. That's not worth anything, you know. The prophet said it, but you know, Jesus was sort of a follower of like Isaiah, actually. Okay, Penina.
Actually, the survival came within the Jewish community itself. And it's not because of their a terrible belief in the Jewish faith. I think it's when the press became, I would say, acceptable as a form of information and communication. And newspaper people like Herzl, who covered the Dreyfus trial, that the guy was blamed for something he never did just because he was a Jew in the French army. I think Herzl started this movement of Zionism. He actually, the first Congress. And because he saw the bad thing that happens to people just because they were Jewish. And he actually was half Jew and his father was the Jew, not the mother. So
But
the thing is,
what about in the Middle Ages and in the Spanish time of Spain and medieval?
again, it's always people who rose up and actually spoke and actually had the charisma to gather people around them. You know, Abba Hillel Silver was the one, a rabbi who spoke for the UN. And he was always invited. By the way, I taught in Silver Temple at my first job in Cleveland. And he was, every time that there was inauguration, he was there as a representative.
Okay,
And
but
he
we're
spoke
talking
to the
about
UN for the thing of to make a state that Israel is, you know,
I know, but way
they
before
deserve it.
that's totally valid. But we were talking about like the whole scope of 3,000 years. But
Yeah,
let's
yes,
go.
yes. The persistent, the persona
Right.
conviction of continue. Yes, yes.
Okay.
Well, that's because we believed in what we were, who we were, and what's our role in the world. That's all.
Okay. Diane, you want to read?
Yes, where do you want me to read?
10. The king
10.
removed his ring.
The king removed his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, son of Hamdata, the Agagite, persecutor of the Jews. The king said to Haman, "The money is yours to keep, and the nation is yours to do with as you please."
Unbelievable. I want to read a little more, but
I have a
can
question
oh yes,
as you
Susan.
go on. Now, the Agagite is unlined. It's underlined.
Yeah,
Now,
that's just because of like it's a spelling thing in the
yeah,
computer.
but this just occurred to me, when Saul didn't kill Agag, because people trace Haman back to that incident where,
Right.
wasn't it Agag, the evil king he was supposed to
Is that right? Who was the Amalekite?
the Amalekites, yes. And there are legends then that because he didn't kill Agag, Agag had sex with was a woman, and there were baby Agags then that came into being, and that those all led up to Hitler. So this clued was the first time I saw it here in print, that maybe this is where the legend came from.
Yeah, that he was. Oh, I'll have to look up if that was his name. I know he did spare a king. You're right.
Yes.
I'm going to look at that. Okay. So, but oh yeah, this is what I wanted to say. How cheap was life in that society that he could say the nation is yours to do as you please? How little consideration was there for life or for strangers or others that you could basically say, okay, if you want to kill them, you know, I don't care. I mean, there was no value of life in this culture that, and I sometimes think, you know, when you don't know people, it's so easy to dehumanize people that you don't know or others or strangers. And we have to be careful even today that we don't dehumanize people that we disagree with. It's hard. I mean, I could be guilty of it myself. I say, you believe that, you're insane, you know, but it's really saying here, it's really saying, you know, the money is, I don't need your money and you can do whatever you want with these people. And I bet that was the ancient world. That was the ancient world. I'm sure it was. Okay, who was reading? Diane, keep going.
The king's scribes were then summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and all that Haman commanded to the king's satraps, is that
Yeah,
what-
that's like his
And the-
officers. Yeah.
and the governors of each province, and to the nobles of each nation was written, to each province according to its script, and each nation according to its language. It was written in King Ahasuerus' name and sealed with the king's signet ring.
So remember, the last time they talked about the king's everybody in their own language. Wait, I'm sorry, I lost it. In their own language, that was when they were announcing about the wives having to obey their husbands in their own language. And again, so we're not just talking about Persia, we're talking about the whole Persian Empire killing all the Jews, which is kind of like the Third Reich. You know, they were conquering all of Europe, and they sent it out. Okay, one more, Diane.
Okay, letters were sent with couriers to all the provinces of the king to annihilate, murder, and destroy all the Jews, young and old, children and women, on one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions.
So Penina is right. It's take all their stuff, kill them, and take all of their possessions, which must have been a incentive. You know what I mean? We know that even, during the Holocaust,
Same thing.
people would, kill or turn in Jews so they could get their apartments, so they could get their businesses, so they get their, so this is, and it's annihilate, murder, and destroy. That's very specific. All the Jews, young and old, children and women, in one day. This is pretty tense. Pretty tense as a story about what's going to happen. It's interesting that we read this, tell the story to our children. It's kind of upsetting. And copies of the edict were to be proclaimed as law in every province, clearly to all the nations, so they should be ready for that day. Can you imagine psychologically knowing there's a day that we're all going to be murdered? What could you do? You couldn't leave. Where could you go? The Persian Empire was so huge. I can't imagine you could get away. And it was going to be a law, which is like the Nazis. You had to turn in Jews, or you could be shot if you didn't report or turn them in or whatever. So it's pretty strong story. Okay. Penina, you want to read? Are you there?
Unmute.
Okay, Penina, unmute.
Yeah,
Okay.
where are we?
I'll
14 or
show you right here. 15.
15. The couriers hurried out with the order of the king, and the law was proclaimed in Shushan the capital. Then the king and Haman sat down to drink, and the city of Shushan was in turmoil.
Can you imagine? And then they said, okay, let's drink on it. It's really dramatic and horrifying. You know what I mean? The coldness, the indifference to what they were doing. Yes, Cindy.
I know Hamas is an acronym, but it's just creepy how close the word Hamas and Haman are.
You're absolutely right. You're right. It is very creepy. And their goal is the same, to annihilate, murder, and destroy all the Jews, young and
They
old.
just didn't take possessions this time. They burned things down, but they didn't
burned
take.
things down. Right.
David, did you hear the news this morning?
No.
Yeah, that's horrible.
And now they're saying that they don't have even 40
That's right. I
hostages.
did
They
hear that.
themselves, they don't have
what?
40
They
hostages
took
alive.
people
They
instead
said-
of things.
They said
Right.
they don't have them, or
Right.
they don't know where they are.
No, they said they don't have them.
They said they
That's
don't
it.
have them.
So like dozens and dozens have been killed. That's what that
That's
means.
it, 40. The last 40, that's what they say. But what about the others before? Okay.
Okay, so keep going, Penina.
Mordecai knew all that had occurred, so Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ash, He went out into the city crying loudly and bitterly.
So that is the typical, grief. You tear your clothes, you wear sackcloth, you put ashes on. I mean, it's, really, okay, keep going.
So the real identity showed up through the acts, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
He went up until the king's gate, for it is improper to enter the king's gate wearing sackcloth.
Oh, see, I never read this before. So he couldn't go in because he was wearing sackcloth. So he could only go until he wasn't allowed in because he was wearing sackcloth. It's so interesting. I never saw that sentence before. Okay, and now, yes, Helen.
I'm confused because it sounds like he's grieving. He's in Shiva, but the day of murder and annihilation and destruction hadn't occurred yet.
Right, but he's in.
Nobody died.
But a day has been declared where they're all going to be murdered. So he's grieving ahead of time.
So that's enough. Okay.
Yeah, everybody is
He's grieving over the decree. He knows
over the
it's coming.
decree. And then this is interesting. Keep going, Penina. Then I want to talk about this. Go ahead.
And in every province, wherever the edict of the king and his law reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, crying, and wailing. Sackcloth and ash were spread out for the masses. Esther made.
Wait.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's no mention of God in this story, which is so interesting. I mean, there's fasting, which is associated with God. You're fasting because you want God to heed you. Crying and wailing. There's no praying in this. No word. There's not the word praying. And there's crying and fasting and mourning and grieving. Everybody's freaking out. And as we could only imagine that happening and knowing it's coming. You're knowing it's coming. Okay, go ahead. One more.
And Esther maids and chamberlains came and told her about it, and the queen was terrified. She sent garments with which to dress Mordecai, so that he would remove his sackcloth from upon him, but he did not accept them.
I swear, I honestly realize I've never really read the Megillah line by line because I didn't remember that. She said, take off your sackcloth and wear regular clothes. And he said, no. And so the women or the people were saying, oh my God, all the Jews in town are crying and wailing and whatever. And they're telling Esther, but they don't know she's a Jew. And she must have heard the decree. So she's terrified. And why do you think she sent Mordecai regular clothes? What was her motivation? Helen.
So that he could approach the king.
So he could approach the king. Okay. I didn't even think of that, but I think you're right.
Yeah, didn't Mordecai once also solve some dreams that the king had?
No.
And he had, I think so.
No.
And he had some kind of a privilege.
No, not yet. No. He's reported a murder.
Okay, there we go. Okay.
Right. But okay, so she was saying, you should come and tell the king. And he refused. So this is interesting now. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so Helen, why don't you read? Everybody's read, right? Yeah. Helen.
Esther summoned Hattach, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had placed in her service, and she commanded him to go to Mordecai to find out the meaning of this and what it was about.
Oh, so she didn't know what it was. She just knew there was all of this turmoil in Shushan and that he was wearing this. Go ahead.
How could she not know of this edict?
I don't know. I mean, women were kept, in the dark about things, but you're right. I don't know, but she didn't, which means you can live in a bubble. It's like an upper class and rich people, the 1%, you live in a bubble. You have no idea what's going on with the rest of society because you live in this sort of privileged, rarefied world. So maybe she didn't know. She was totally removed at this point, which it's going to change because okay, keep going.
Hattach went out to Mordecai to the city square that was in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him about all that had happened to him and about the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the right to destroy the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the law. I guess this means Mordecai gave Hatash a copy of the law.
Right.
That was proclaimed in Shushan, calling for their annihilation, to show Esther and to tell her about it, and to instruct her to go to the king, to beseech him and to plead with him on behalf of her nation.
Wow. So, okay, I just want to see what you. All right. So now, okay, Cindy, because let's just read this episode and then we're going to talk about it.
Hatash went and relayed the words of Mordecai to Esther. Esther told Hatash to relay to Mordecai, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes to the king and enters the inner courtyard without being summoned, his is but one verdict, execution. Except for the person to whom the king extends his golden scepter, only he shall live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for 30 days now.
Okay, so that kind of explains why she didn't know what was going on, because she'd been in the harem. Okay, and he says,
They relayed Esther's words to Mordecai, and Mordecai said to relate to Esther, do not think that you will escape the fate of all the Jews by being in the king's palace.
Here we go.
For if you will remain silent at this time, relief and salvation will come to the Jews from another source, and you and the house of your father will be lost. And who knows if it is not for just such a time that you reach this royal position.
okay, hold on, wait a minute. Okay, let's finish the whole thing. Go ahead.
Esther said to relate to
Okay.
Go and gather all the Jews who are in Shushan and fast for my sake. Do not eat and do not drink for 3.
Whoops, 3, hold on.
Days.
Yeah,
Good
really.
job.
Sorry, this thing is too good.
Night and day. My maids and I also fast in the same way. Then I shall go to the king, though it is unlawful, and if I perish, I perish. Mordecai then left and did all that Esther had instructed him.
Okay. Again, you know, there's no mention of God, but it seems like, and scholars have said this, God is working behind the scenes, you know, and this is kind of the way we live today. You know, we don't have God interfering literally, but sometimes you feel like there's a hand, there's fate. So what Esther was terrified and had been not seen the king for 30 days, but there's twofold to what Mordecai says to her. What does he say to her about her reluctance? What are the two different points? They're very interesting because they're kind of like the opposite of each other.
Well, one that he could find another source.
Okay, meaning who?
I don't know.
We don't know. Okay, what else? Helen, you were going to raise your hand?
Yeah, I just forgot my thought. I'm sorry.
Okay, so he said, don't think you're going to be spared. Don't think you're going to get out of this. You know, you're Jewish and, you know, you're not going to be spared. And there's this really famous story about the head of the Lodz ghetto named Ramkowski. Ramkowski was his name. And he was the head of the Jewish, what was it called? The Judenrat, the Jewish committee, or the ones that the Nazis would give him the laws or everything, and he would have to make it happen. He was in charge, you know, and they kept saying, you have to give us so many thousand Jews a day. You have to give us the poor, the sick. You have to give us this. And he kept saying, we'll save the majority. We have to sacrifice. We have to sacrifice. And he kept agreeing to send different Jews, and they were going to Auschwitz and being killed. And he kept, you know, convincing them that this is the way that we can save the majority. But ultimately, you know, they were all sent. And in the end, he was sent as well. And when he got to Auschwitz, the Jews of Lodz who saw him there literally killed them with their bare hands. They killed him because he convinced them not to fight, not to protest, just to go, you know, peacefully, because that would be the way to save the rest. So they killed him. And he probably thought, same with the Jewish police in the Warsaw Ghetto, that they would not be, in trouble. They were separate, that they would be spared. And Mordecai saying, you're not going to be spared. Don't think because you're the queen, you'll be spared. But then he says something else that is kind of mystical or prophecy. What does he say as well? Penina?
I think he's reminding her what her heritage is. As we spoke in the beginning, they were descended of King David. They were from the same family. Once they are perished, the kingdom is gone. The whole idea of a statehood, of people, of wherever it is, that how you want to connect it to the land or to the people. To be
also, though, he says, who
the
knows?
monarchy is gone, so you are like riffraff.
Yeah, but he says that could be implied. But he says, who knows if this is not the reason you were chosen to be queen?
Oh, that's a good one.
Who knows if this is not the very reason that you are in this position?
Right.
That it was all meant to be, that this man would arise and that you would be in the position to save your people.
So now he's not assimilating anymore. Now he's going straight to God. Okay.
Right. Even though God's not mentioned, again, we do feel the presence of God or something. And she says, okay. She hears that. And when you talk about gutsy, I don't know if I like the word gutsy, but I like the word of like, sometimes we rise to the occasion. The opportunity or the crisis happens and we rise to it. It's not who we were or we are, or we thought we would be. We never thought we would do this, but we are going to do it because now's the time and it's up to me. It's up to us. And so, she says, I could be automatically executed. And he says, who knows if this isn't their point. So then I think, even though God isn't mentioned, she says, fast for 3 days. I mean, who are they fasting for? If not, that's a way of praying to God or connecting to God. We know Yom Kippur, purifying yourself. Everybody fast. 3 days is a long time. And by the way, in the Orthodox tradition, the day before Purim is called the Fast of Esther, and people do fast for a day, not 3 days. But there's the Fast of Esther, Ta'anit Esther. And so people fast, and then they have this they remember the thing about it is they remember the danger. They remember the crisis, and then they celebrate the redemption. Whereas we just sort of go straight to the celebration. They remember the crisis. Penina.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I have to tell you something. I know it's going to take away from the Megillah for a minute, but not really. There was a guy in England, in Britain, that was taken to England when he was a child. And then he never said that he was Jewish. He grew up and he became a member of the parliament. And he changed his name. And in 1948, when the state declared independence, when the state was declared independence, and they were faced the war of 1948, and they didn't even have rifles. The British left everything to the Arabs. So I was there, so that's a fact. And my brother-in-law was one of the ones who defended Jerusalem during the Babel Wad thing that happened. But what I'm going back to this guy. Nobody knew that he was Jewish. He was a member of the parliament. In 1948, he got up and he said, my name is this and this, and I am a Jew. And he made sure that he had also a lot of printing and journalism houses. He had five kids, and he got up and he said what he is. And he actually made sure that Israel got rifles, and they were also only the Czech rifles. They were really heavy. That's why Uziel invented the Uzi, because they were so heavy. So, by the way, the Uzi now is being replaced by a gun that's called the Tavor, because Deborah took her people to the mountain of Tavor. So right. I want to tell you that the Israeli army is following strategies and people very closely, even till today.
That's
So,
beautiful.
yeah,
So
strategy
maybe he was
definitely.
placed in parliament for that reason.
Yes,
Just like
and wait,
Esther.
wait. And then it made a big speech against the Arab, and they found him dead and naked, floating in the sea. He had a private boat. Somebody killed him, and
Wow.
he was murdered. My cousin Steve, who did a thing in one of, well, he was a Holocaust survivor, was his cousin on the mother's side. And he had a vision, how do you call it when we are being called to somebody important and you only meet with them in one room? It was like, there's a word for it, like, anyhow, he went and he talked to him in Yiddish, and he asked him how is his family and who survived and everything. Maxwell,
Okay.
his name was
All right.
Robert Maxwell.
Okay.
Now I'm remembering. You could look up now in the
All right.
books and see
Thank
that
you.
I'm not telling you yeah. And he was murdered. Somebody
Wow.
killed him.
I am going to look that up. Okay, let's just go to Esther. How much time do we have? We have a few minutes. Let's see. Cindy, you read. Okay. Merle, do you want to read? So we just have a few minutes. On the third day, Esther donned garments of royalty. You're muted.
She
On
said
the
she
third day, Esther donned garments of royalty and stood in the inner courtyard of the palace, facing the palace. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the palace, facing the palace entrance. When the king saw Queen Esther standing in the courtyard and found favor in his eyes,
She
she found favor in his eyes. The king extended to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand, and Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. The king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even if it be half the kingdom, it will be granted you." Esther said, "If it will please the king, let the king and Haman come today to the feast that I have prepared for him."
So, it strikes me, the feast also, she would be happy to eat because she'd been fasting for 3 days. So there's a feast. But she dressed in her royal garments. So she put on her armor. She put on her armor of beauty, which is what attracted him in the first place, and went in there, and she didn't know what was going to happen, but she was ready. And she took that chance, and he, saw her and let her approach. It doesn't really describe the danger or what she felt, but she must have felt that. And then I'm going to read this. The king said, "Tell Haman to hurry and fulfill Esther's bidding." And the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. At the wine feast, so we know they're big shickers, they're big drunks. The king said to Esther, "What is your plea? It will be granted you. What is your request? Even if it shall be half the kingdom, it shall be fulfilled." And so Esther replied, "My plea and my request, if I have found favor in the king's eyes, and if it please the king to grant my plea and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the feast that I shall prepare for them, and tomorrow I shall fulfill the king's bidding." So I don't know. Why twice? Why did they have to come twice? So I think that's, an interesting thought. We have 1 minute. So anything just that strikes you? Helen?
Yeah, I think to gain favor in the king's and maybe even Haman's minds, that not once, but twice, she's lavishing this great feast upon them so that they will trust her, so that they will be influenced by her.
To get down their guard, to get down Haman's guard. Also, I don't know, if you drink 2 nights in a row, are you a little hangovery, and you're a little softer or less, more vulnerable or more manipulatable or something like that. But it's interesting that or maybe if we're looking at Esther, she was too nervous to do it the first day. And she needed time to get up her guts. You know what I mean? Like, oh my God, I can't do it. I can't do it. I'm too scared. Okay, come back tomorrow. So maybe she's in charge, or maybe she's just terrified and not ready, and she needs more time to prepare. So it's interesting. And she does something very crafty that most of you probably don't know what she does to Haman during this second encounter. We'll probably finish the thing next time. So thank you so much. It was so nice to study with you. And
Thank you.
I'll see
Thank
you.
you.
Have a
This
nice
is
week,
wonderful.
everybody.
Actually, oh yeah, by the way, if any of you haven't signed up, you should come to the Women's Seder. It's going to be wonderful. We're focusing on the women of Israel.
Wish
as
I
our-
could.
By
yeah.
the way, it's called an audience when you're meeting somebody.
Oh yeah, have an audience, a private
Right.
audience. That's right.
No, I mean
Just-
when I told you about my cousin went to
Yeah,
do it
one
in
and one.
England.
When you have
Yeah.
private,
One-on-one, it's
you
called
say
an
it's a
audience.
private
Yeah.
audience. Yeah.
It
Right.
won't do us any good, but I don't know if everyone knows Kate Middleton's maternal grandmother was Jewish. Her mother converted
Really?
to Church of England, but her DNA is still 50% Jewish.
Wow, interesting.
Wow.
Okay. Well, we should say a Misha Berach for her.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a nice day.